supposed to be 0-01. Do I have it correct?
No, it's all.
It is O. Oh, my mistake. To amend 13-2-15 sub H.
So this change to the ordinance actually is a change to the zoning code. So this will require a public hearing. This is just for discussion purposes as a first draft. This gets to the idea of the sign illumination and nuisance prevention and the internally illuminated signs we just discussed. There's been a couple of signs that have come up recently that actually face lands that are either zoned or used for residential purposes. And currently our ordinance prohibits internal illumination of signs that face land zoned or used for residential purposes. So we discussed at a staff level how to add some leeway and flexibility for the board to consider these on an individual basis for approval. So the language that's being proposed is essentially this. Signs which are internally illuminated shall not face adjacent lands which are zoned for or used as single family or duplex use. That is the existing language. We basically add on to that says unless approved by the town board after consideration of whether the request would have a substantial adverse effect on adjacent residential property or properties, factors to be considered shall include distance between the proposed sign and the existing or potential future single family or duplex residential uses, screening or buffers between the proposed sign and existing or potential future single family or duplex residential uses, size of the proposed sign, and then whether the adjacent property or properties are currently used for single family or duplex residential or just happen to be zoned for single family and duplex and maybe say farmed. So that's the language and the factors that we have drafted for consideration.
Thank you.
So the question we have is, does the town board want to be the petitioner for this ordinance change?
I think that would be appropriate since it's not just for one sign in the town, but rather potentially could affect many, many signs in the town. I would agree.
Put it on a public hearing for January 11th.
Thank you.
I got one question, Mr. Chairman, and that's when I read this, there's A, B, C, and D, okay? And I'm just not sure to me that D makes much sense if you consider the part of the ordinance that already exists. And then A and B, I think D is just kind of confusing and duplication and so forth. I just think that I mean, the basic part of it says shall not face adjacent lands which are zoned for or used as single family or duplex use. That stays in place. And A, B, and C make a lot of sense to me, but D says whether the adjacent properties are currently used for single family or duplex residential. I don't know what that adds to.
The purpose of that, we were trying to distinguish between an empty lot. The black letter rule that is not changing is whether it's zoned and or used. So you can have an empty lot that's zoned residential that they can't put the sign facing, even though nothing's there at the moment. So what we were trying to distinguish in D is to look to whether it is currently used or a vacant lot. Now, we could have said the opposite, whether the adjacent properties are currently vacant, but we were trying, that was the only point to remind people to think about the distinction.
So if I may real quick, so consider the possibility where there's so the distance between the proposed sign and what's across the street, let's say there's a farmhouse across the street and it's maybe kitty corner, and it's a big farm lot, there's no screening or buffers between the sign and what's across the street. The sign may be small, But the only really differentiating factor is that it's not really used for residential, it's used for ag. And there just happens to be a home that's kitty corner, it's zoned for ag use. So that would be one thing you could hang your hat on and say, well, the business is here, the business is kind of here first before it's developed as residential use. We're gonna allow a small sign here to be internally illuminated, that's okay.
And I understand that, but I'll just tell you, I don't personally like that, or it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if we sit there and say, okay, if there'd be a house there now instead of a farmhouse, okay? Whether zoned residential, but there's a house there instead of a farmhouse, we're saying, okay, the current use of it is really a farm, so we're gonna allow that, and then 6 months later, so we say, okay, it's okay in this instance, but 6 months later, somebody comes by and back and subdivides it and put residences in there, then would we say, if we didn't known it was gonna be this, we'd never approve it? I mean, we're not gonna tell somebody to take the sign down or put up screening.
No,
I just don't think that's something that we should even be considering. We've got flexibility with some of the rest of it, but I just,
but I guess
I'm
what
not
the-
in for that
But
part
what
of
could
it.
happen in that scenario is, first of all, the person developing the lot across the street for residential knows that the sign is there, right? So they are developing that, knowing that that sign exists. If they should choose to, they could buffer that somehow through screening, et cetera. The sign happened to be there first. So it's not like the sign comes after the subdivision is there where, it's not fair to the residents necessarily that already live there. In this case, the development comes after, they know what they're getting into.
I have a better example. It's used for residential, but it's zoned commercial, it's legal non-conforming. It's the last house on Sunset where everything else has been developed. And we know that at some point the house is going to come down and that's going to be redeveloped as a commercial property because it's legal non-conforming. That's the kind of
Yeah, do
situation
you
that.
deny it because it's a house, even though 6 months from now it's probably gonna be a business?
That was more the point. But if you want to strike it, you can strike it.
I-
We thought people should think about it.
Moreover, ultimately, it's a board's, not necessarily this board's decision, but future boards, it's their decision to approve it or not approve it.
Well, I
So
understand
we
that.
have all the flexibility that
But,
we
but my
want.
point is, and I appreciate, because I'm the one that pushed to do this, to put the flexibility into it. I just don't see much what that adds to it, frankly. I mean, if we look at the distance, we look at signing, we look at screening, or that type of thing, and there's a possibility that it could be residential. I think when we go to look at those exceptions and approve it, we ought to consider the possibility that it might be a residential use. That's just my point of view.
Very good.
And I think the rest of it's just more cumbersome than it needs to be. And I'm all for the flexibility. I'm completely in support of the concept. I just think that's more than what we need.
Thank you.
We need a motion to initiate the petition to make the change. That just sets it for a public hearing. We'll
Yep.
still take the input, we'll still decide the final wording after the public hearing, but I need a motion to initiate the petition.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to initiate the change.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.